Hello and welcome to another episode of DCU Daily. And today we are talking about the Arkham series that is now going to be developed for the DCU. Of course, that's a show that it was initially meant to be like a Gotham PD show, and um, Matt Reeves was involved. Everybody sort of assumed that it was going to be part of the Batman universe, and then as it turns out, James Gunn insisted late last year in 2023 that no, indeed, this show is going to be a part of the DCU, and it's being redeveloped. Antonio Campos is attached as a showrunner, and he's got a decent amount of experience both in TV and film. So he's somebody that is talented, and I think it's fair to assume that Matt Reeves chose him for a reason. But beyond that, beyond the fact that we know Antonio Campos is attached and Matt Reeves has been working on this, and the fact that they're redeveloping it, so there was another version of the show before, and the fact that it's part of the DCU, we don't really know much about the story. We don't know who the characters are going to be. We don't even know where it really fits into the world of the DCU, whether it's going to be a part of Chapter One, Part Two, Chapter Two, wherever it's going to go. We know it's going to be obviously a TV show, so it's going to, and of course, being Arkham, it's going to be connected to the world of the Batman. So not the Batman, but Batman within the DCU. So today to talk about all of that and try to like glean some insight from the limited information that we do have and maybe answer some of those questions that I just mentioned, we've got, of course, John. John, how are you doing today?
Great. I'm definitely want to talk about this kind of, I guess you could say, enigma about Arkham. I'm not apologizing for that terrible joke, but yeah, Arkham is just
Yeah.
sort of like this weird, like almost anomaly of a show because, like, obviously the five shows that were introduced for the Chapter One, Part One, um, they all got announcing that like big announcement. I think it was like over a year ago that he was celebrating that on Threads. But yeah, like we got those announcements for the films and the movies, and then once the Batman came out, we got like this little tidbit of not only this but the Penguin, but we already talked about that. Um, so we're like, okay, so we're getting a Gotham PD show, and the Commissioner Gordon is going to be, or in this case, Lieutenant Gordon. I don't think he got promoted in the film. It's been a while since I saw it, but
I don't think
uh,
so.
yeah. So it would focus, I believe, on him and the Gotham PD. Um, but I can only imagine that it got redeveloped. If I had to take a guess, was because of the Gotham show, the other Gotham show with Ben McKenzie as Gordon. Um, so they probably just Matt Reeves is a very creative guy, and he probably just wants to forge his own vision of everything in terms of his universe. So he's like, okay, um let's not do the Gotham PD. Well, Arkham Asylum was a big part of the film, so might as well do it on that. That just again, that's speculation from me. That's just how I imagine it probably went. So he was like, "All right, let's do a Arkham show." And the thing is, we did get a lot of stuff about Arkham in the Batman because that was where, because I don't know when this was implemented. I would imagine it was the New 52 if I had to take a guess. But Bruce Wayne's mother, Martha Wayne, was Martha Kane, but her family was the Arkhams. She came from, I forget which side of her family. I would imagine her mother's side came from like the Arkhams, and how that side became, and how she eventually was thrown in to Arkham Asylum because she was insane, as it was revealed by the Riddler, and Batman didn't know this, and how his father was like a dirty politician, I believe. And so there was like all this information that came out that it's like, okay, so we have all this information in regards to Arkham. And on top of that, we had that cameo from Barry Keoghan's Joker. That's where Edward Nashton was last, shown in the film, and them like kind of colluding together, and maybe as a tease to whatever project in the future. But with all this, that was kind of thrown out the window because during this time, I think Antonio Campos was then added as the showrunner, director, writer, and executive producer for the show. But then eventually, as we all know from December, James Gunn's like, nope, screw all that. This is going to be part of the DCU. Where it's like, okay. And then that's like the most we've gotten pretty much. That's like the biggest news we've gotten, which was 2 months ago, which was fairly recently, although with how the internet is, 2 months ago is like 2 decades ago at this point. But so we haven't gotten anything in regards to that with despite the announcement. So we're like, okay, what would so what's going on here? Well, we know is Arkham and the fact it's going to place in the DCU. So I imagine, I think what could be kind of like you could go in a lot of different ways with this. Now, Campos, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Antonio Campos. His biggest addition in terms of the entertainment world, in terms of television, was The Staircase, which was a biographical drama series about Michael Peterson, who was a crime novelist who got accused of killing his wife. And that was based on a true story, although I would imagine I have not seen the Staircase, but I imagine it goes like in a more dramatized, fictionalized sort of thing. With that background in terms of this director, writer, and producer, I think it would be really cool to have like almost like a faux documentary style type of thing where it would be like it tells the history of Arkham, like almost like a bit by bit, and then it kind of, like through this like documentary, it could be like marketed as like you don't know like the real Arkham, but now you do sort of thing. Especially when it's not at all attached to the previous universe, because we know nothing about the DCU now, so we know nothing about the DCU's Arkham. So I think it'd be really cool to have like I forget her name, the famous journalist who opened up about I believe women's mental institutions, totally blanking on her name, but it was a famous story about how she blew the lid on this whole thing and how like poorly treated these people were in mental institutions. It could like kind of be like that, where it's like this fictionalized journalist, not Lois Lane or anything like that, because that would be too dumb. Like maybe like get like someone who's like not as big, obviously, and then blow the lid off of like what Arkham Asylum is, and this would be the
Yeah.
documentary in universe explaining all that. I think that could be really cool. Or
By
you
the way,
could just simply, what
the
was it?
name of the name of the woman is Nellie Bly, I
Nellie
think.
Bly. Yes, thank you. It was right on the tip of my tongue. I'm like, I know I was just talking about this
Yeah,
the other day. So
1887. I mean, a long time,
yes.
which would the vibe would fit well
Yeah,
with
I
both
think that could
Gotham.
like fit really well, like
Yeah,
sort of like this fictionalized documentary. Or you could just go simple and just be like, let's show a bunch of villains that not a lot of people know and their lives of Arkham Asylum. You could go either way with that. I just think that the fictionalized documentary route could like be such a freaking cool idea. That would just be like, because you're world building. You're building the world so much. You're building Gotham because obviously we don't know when this is going to come out in relation to Brave and the Bold, but whether it be before, whether it be after, you're building Gotham City. You're building the world of this version of Gotham City. And on top of that, you're building the Rogue Gallery without a million Batman movies coming out. So you're going to obviously get the villain in Brave and the Bold, whoever that may be. And then you're going to build these villains as well. So you either build the history of Gotham City, all that world building with what I mentioned with the documentary style, or you can build the villains, like build the rogues, which ones were fought by Batman, which ones weren't, who know him as like sort of like almost like an urban legend. That could be like two different groups, like you're in like a group therapy session. People only know him as like, oh, it's the Bat. He doesn't actually exist. And or it's like, no, I fought him. He exists. Kind of like that
yeah,
Batman the Animated Series episode Almost Got Him, where they're all kind of just shooting the shit and they're all just talking about
yeah.
how they almost got Batman. There's like
Yeah, and there's
there's so many
also
different ways you could do it. Like it would be
yeah.
really cool.
I mean, I was gonna say there's also been other instances, even in the Justice League, where they're like, Cyborg has that line where like, "I didn't think you were real," He's like,
Yeah.
"I'm real when it's useful." And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
because he's
Exactly.
and that
So
Batman had been around for what, a couple of decades, and even then it was like a myth, like a legend.
yeah,
Because
like the
even in
police
Batman
officer.
versus Superman, they treated him like a legend, like he's
Yeah,
some
like
kind
the
of like
police officer was like, I saw him. I saw him. And it was like almost like this disbelief, even though he works with, he worked with Gordon,
right.
and it like even the police officer was like in disbelief, like I saw the Batman. That's crazy, right?
Yeah, so
So
yeah, yeah. Or
it was
even
like,
going, I mean, they've always treated him that way, which I think is fantastic because it builds up the
yeah,
aura of the character.
yeah,
Even in
he's
like the
serious
Dark
about
Knight, like the Dark Knight Rises, I love the part where he's like stop, he's trying to like stop. It's the scene where the Bane and his crew like are raiding the stock market, and like this young cop like shoots through his electromagnetic gun or something, and he's like, don't stop pointing that thing before you get somebody hurt." Like this old cop is like, "You weren't around 80 years ago when Batman was the shit, like, and like now you're just coming in and shooting at him because somebody told you to." Like I really appreciate that because I think that helps you have Batman be part of that show without him actually being there. You know, I think that would be the best part about that. I think I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I just think you could be like really cool with how like building the world, building Batman's villains, building this. Like it has a chance to really, it's not just like telling a story, which obviously it needs to do that. Obviously, that's the thing it needs to do at the forefront. It needs to tell a good story. So obviously, that's the main thing it needs to do. But I think it's also a chance to like build the world, build Batman's villains, all of that. And I think that could be really cool. And I am curious with how it does fit in because that's another thing I wanted to kind of ask questions about because like as we all know, this wasn't originally part of the announcement. So are we getting all 5 films and all 5 TV shows now before this? Because that's a long time. If even if we're getting 2 things a year after this year, because it looks like we're only getting Legacy and Creature Commandos this year, at the very most, we're probably going to get 2 films and 2 shows a year. Maybe even only 1 show a year because, TV show that's a lot more time, a lot more budget per episode, a lot more casting, and a lot more all that. Especially with stuff like Lanterns and Paradise Lost, which I assume are going to be big ensemble casts with all of that. So I think we might only get 1 show a year, and even then, that's 5 years down the line, and even then, we're gonna have a lot of TV shows going because, TV shows run for a long amount of time. So, it's curious where how this is gonna finish. So, are we gonna get it kinda crammed in there? Either I would assume whenever Brave and the Bold comes out, whether that's 2026 or 2027. I assume it's gonna be soon after that. I feel like we're just gonna kinda get it inserted into chapter 1, part 1, because it just makes sense because it's like, okay, we get this movie that gives us this, like, taste of this world. We get this Batman, we get this Robin, we get whatever villain is part of that, we get that taste, and then it's like, okay, how does that do? Because Andy Muschietti, not exactly a lot of people pointed out, not really the best choice for a Batman film, considering that he did give DC one of its biggest bombs in history. So, not totally his fault, but still, it was, correlation. So we have all that. So it's like, okay, do we go right after that? Like, okay, it's not just this. It's not just if Brave and the Bold is a bad movie, which we all hope it isn't. Okay, so how do they go from there? Do we get this Arkham series right after that, where they're like, okay, let's try to stray away from Batman, do that fictionalized documentary as I mentioned, or if it is good, okay, cool, we could show all these villains now. So I would imagine it would come right after, and right after, if it's like maybe 2026. However, if Brave and the Bold is taking a little bit longer because of Andy Muschietti's prior commitments to Welcome to Derry, then it could be like an introduction to the Gotham City that we want to see, and we get that. So I feel like again, it's one of those things that could go in like so many different directions, and I kind of just wanted to be like kind of shoot to see like what would stick. So I don't know. There's a lot of things you can really do with this, and I feel like there's like not just the things I mentioned, but there's just so much. There's so many great ideas you could do with this. Like you could even set up like a Suicide Squad thing. Like you could even tie it into Waller. Like Waller is going to be about her maybe in prison, as we discussed that a couple weeks back. And okay, she gets out of prison, maybe in Waller, and then she wants to set up Task Force X, and we actually get them. We get and this sort of like maybe teases that, crosses over. That could also be an interesting idea. I would want them to kind of take a break from Suicide Squad, especially with how Kill the Justice League has
I
been
think
getting
they are.
not
Like, I
great
don't think they have
reviews,
any
but
plans for
yeah,
it.
so considering
Yeah.
how the Suicide Squad is just kinda not in a great place right now, I think they'll probably wanna stay away from that, but I feel like the fictionalized documentary route or the Batman Rogue Gallery route could be the best options. I think maybe even focus on an inmate that isn't like a famous villain, or maybe like a super like Z-list villain, like, oh, it's the ventriloquist or something like that. Just someone who's like a really small villain or someone who isn't a villain and is kind of like experiencing like all these fucking like actually really insane people. Like obviously he's crazy because he's in an asylum, but like he's witnessing like what the most insane people could be who have, gone toe to toe with the bad. So like you could even do that as well. And I feel like again, both could work before and after the film. Just again, so many different cool things could go with this. And I'm genuinely excited for it. I just wish we got some more information in regards to this is all.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason maybe why we haven't gotten a lot of information is because there probably isn't much to go off of, or what they're working on now is pretty early on because like you said, we're most likely not gonna get this show for maybe another 3, 4 years, which is a long time to put a show into development for, honestly, especially for something that's I mean, yes, they're redeveloping it, but, like, technically, it's been on the on the dance card for at least a couple of years already, and it's been at least a year since we learned that they had changed it from being a Gotham PD show to an Arkham focus show. So I can't imagine that changing it from an Arkham focus show to an Arkham focus show within the DCU means starting completely over.
Yeah,
They're
right.
probably adapting it, so I mean, my guess would be that this show is meant to come out sometime around when, like you mentioned, like when The Brave and the Bold comes out, and it's kind of like a follow up to that. Like, I think DC has really liked what they did with, even though the Suicide Squad, the James Gunn version, didn't do terribly well in the pandemic. I think they really liked how spinning off Peacemaker became such a fantastic hit for them. And because the audience had such a positive reception of Suicide Squad, especially when it landed exclusively on Max after it was in theaters, which actually I think wasn't that one of the movies that was I think it might have been simultaneously on. But anyway, um, it picked up a bigger audience on streaming, and then they wanted to see John Cena Peacemaker in its own show. So and then if you look at what Jim Lee has said in recent times with regards to comic book tie-ins to their movies and TV shows, I think there's a big focus over at DC, which I think James Gunn will continue to only champion. It's this multi-platform Nexus events where they're trying to say, okay, so we got a new Aquaman movie coming out. We're gonna have tie-in comics. We're gonna try to release like books around it. We're gonna try to, and then the next logical step is let's try to do a spin-off show. And the only thing is, in the past, people have done that where they say, "Oh, the Batman is fantastic. The Penguin character came out so well. Colin Farrell is interested. Let's do a Penguin spinoff." But
Right.
it happens after you make the movie, or while you're making the movie, the idea is being floated around, and then it becomes its own project. Same thing happened with Peacemaker. It wasn't something that was thought about before the movie was made. Whereas I think they're trying to get ahead of it a little bit and say, all right, how can we have these TV show tie-ins? A little bit like what the MCU has started to do. Although the MCU has had mixed results, I mean, I think the DCU has a little more creative freedom to kind of, especially because it's going to be on HBO. I think you can go with something that's rated R. You can go with more of this experiment more with the genres and kind of push your extremes a little bit more. So I think that's maybe what they will do. I love the idea of having like that Nellie Bly kind of a journalist who's giving us when you were talking about that, to me, District 9, District 9. That's what's flashing in front of my
Oh
eyes.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm
definitely.
like, that's what we could do here. And I mean, Nellie Bly wouldn't necessarily be like could be the stand-in for the character. Like it may not be exactly that, or they can go in that direction, certainly. But I think that would be a great way to do it because then again, eh, when you tie that together with what we talked about, how Batman is like a myth and a legend, even years after doing what he's doing, his and his there's a lot of people out there who simply don't come face to face with him. And so the very few that do, their stories are like these legendary tales that they'd like to tell and other people want to listen to them. And that I think will be a great way to build up the character even
Yeah,
further. And to that end, if they were to go in that direction, I think this show should come out before that Batman movie
yeah.
does.
I
Um,
think that would be better as well.
like you want to build it up before, like you said, world building. You want to build up the world of this Batman before you introduce the
Yeah,
character. And you make because then when the movie comes out, that movie is gonna feel super rich from the first frame, from the first scene. You're not gonna have to, watch the whole movie to realize the world of this Batman. Whereas like the Batman that Matt Reeves just did, the longer the movie played out, the more you learned about the city as a character as well as a setting where the story's taking place. With the show, they can really get a head start on it, and then you can almost kind of like skip a few elements of introduction. Like you don't have to do you can kind of dive into the story a little bit faster. Granted, I think they're probably aware of the fact they don't want to go in a direction where they're making it seem like you need to watch the show to watch the movie. I think like they
yeah.
can maybe find a balance between the two things. But still, yeah, I think that'd be a great way to approach it. One question that I did have for you is this gonna be the kind of show that becomes almost like an anthology? Is this a one-off miniseries, or do you feel like it's gonna become a show that can go multiple seasons? And when I say that, I mean, look, sometimes there are shows that are made to be miniseries that then are so popular they decide to do more seasons, and all of a sudden it's not a miniseries anymore. Like we've seen Marvel kind of pivot that way with a couple of their shows, and excuse me, when it came down to Emmy consideration, they'd had to change, what categories they can qualify for. Um, so do you feel like that, like they'll have a plan for that to be a multi-season story arc or some sort of anthology, or do you think they're seeing this as let's build up that first movie and then we'll see what we want to do in the future?
I think it would be best to just have it as a mini series because the showrunner is best known for a mini series. So I feel like they would want to bring that certain expertise on a sort of enclosed episodic story. And it seems like with the Penguin, it seems like that's also going to be a mini series because I feel like they just want to tell these like tight knit stories like in the world. I know the Penguin is well, it's technically different now because the Penguin is still part of the Batman universe, while the Arkham show is no longer a part of the Batman show. But I feel like, just the way we've, you know, gotten it with the 5 shows that have been announced, that they're shows, that they're TV series that are gonna go for multiple seasons with multiple arcs, all these characters, all that. And so I think it would make the most sense to just have this quietly be like, is just kind of getting in as like a mini series and then it gets out. Like it just builds the movie a little bit and then it gets out. I think that's where I feel like they're going. It could work as an anthology, like a different group of villains every time, maybe even in a different, like sort of like you can do even both, like sort of like have like a story that is like entire first season is Arkham Asylum opening, how it was initially supposed to be this thing that like helped people, and then it kind of just became as the degenerate asylum for the crazies, like how it was supposed to be like Arkham Mental Hospital, but then it became Arkham Asylum, and you can like kind of have that sort of like continuous story, but like oh, it's like the 1800s and then it's the 1900s and then it's the 2000s and you can have like all of that. Um so that could also work, but I feel like it would stick with the miniseries format because just with how everything else is going on in the DCU right now in terms of what's been announced, all those seem to be like TV series that'll run for multiple seasons, and I feel like this would just fit the best as a mini series. Like, okay, this is what our world is. whether it be before or after, preferably before, and then that's it. I just feel like that's the best course of action.
Yeah, I mean, I personally like the idea of making it an anthology because I think that would be a great way for them to, just like you said, explore Arkham through the ages. Like, I think a good comparison would be American Horror Story, right? It's the seasons don't really connect directly, but they all sort of exist, like, in different pockets of the same larger multiverse or whatever continuity you want to call it. So it would be fantastic to sort of like just where pick a time and the history of Arkham or even the present day of Arkham and just kind of explore a set of stories from that time period. Um, and then yeah, we can probably even like you said earlier, we can explore the history of Batman's parentage. Like we can explore what Martha Wayne his connections are, and we can go farther beyond that, like farther back beyond that. Now, the thing is with that, they're probably not going to want to do too much overlap with what they're planning on doing in the Batman
Mhm.
universe, which seems like they're going the Court of Owls route. So I think if you go in that direction, isn't that going to be all of a sudden they're doing the same thing in both places, or like so maybe there are some limitations, like you can only do so much, which is unfortunate because I mean, I guess maybe they could still probably pull it off. I suppose there's nothing against the idea of you wanna do 2 versions of the Court of Owls or something like that, where they both are distinct and unique. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think they'll want to go like copy the Batman too much because they don't know if like they want to do that in future films or even the Penguin. There could maybe be a mention there. So yeah, I don't think they'll want to do too much overlap between the two universes because I feel like that would just be too much, like it might be repetitive a little bit. Like, oh, okay, they're doing this and this for both universes. All right, come on. So I think they'll just want to be as distinct as possible.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of which, I actually was wondering, do you think they'll have some heroes that they're gonna just keep off, like, hands off? Like, you can't do the Joker, you can't do not only for the fact that they probably wanna save them for the Batman movies, but also for the Batman. Like, like it's they clearly already have a Joker that in mind that, Barry Keegan's already been cast in that role, whether they go with it in the next movie or not. As well as, of course, the Riddler isn't quite, dead at the end of that first film, and the Penguins, and, of course, you already had was it Falcone or was it Falcone's the one who dies at the end, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's who
Carmine
yeah,
Falcone. Yeah.
Carmine Falcone. So do you think they're gonna have some of those same villains with, like, different iterations in the DCU, and specifically this show? Or do you think there's enough depth in the Batman Rogues Gallery that they can easily have enough, fodder for the Batman universe and any spin-offs they do for that beyond the Penguin, like if they decide to do after the second movie another spin-off of some kind, while also having enough for the Batman on film in the DCU, and still have enough left over for something in Arkham. Like, is there
I
enough
think
out there?
because the Batman is seen as so, like, realistic, and then I imagine Brave and the Bold is gonna be very, over exaggerated, more of that comic book tone. I feel like with the way they do it, they will be, I think, like, you could have the same villains on the screen together and it would work. I mean, they had Gotham on and the DCU going on at the same time and all that. But however, the what
But that's
WB
not quite the same thing, right? Because like, it's
yeah,
on
because
Fox, like,
TV
it's
and
not.
movies, and WB did say that they didn't wanna do Justice League Mortal because, oh, people would be confused that these are 2 different Batmen, even though it would have been extraordinarily obvious. So, it could go either way, but, like, I feel like with how WB is, um, they would probably be like, okay, you can't use these zones because we're using them for the Batman, but once they're used for the Batman, maybe you could use them for Brave and the Bold. However, it might be the inverse because James Gunn, even though he's not like, he even said himself, he's like, I'm not the Kevin Feige of the DC. That's more Peter Safran. I'm on the creative side. I direct, I write. I'm more of the artistry side. So I can only imagine Peter Safran would do, like, from like a business point of view, would probably want to separate Batman and the DCU as much as possible. So he would probably be like, okay, sure, Riddler, that can be used for the Batman. Hey, James Gunn, don't use the Riddler for your DCU. Also, don't use Clayface or whoever is going to be the villain, or don't use Hush or whoever else is going to be the villain. Court of Owls, don't use this, don't use that. So I feel like there will be some sort of like, okay, there's certain things you can't use. And as we've said before, restriction can cause more creativity. So they're like, okay, Matt Reeves, you can't use this villain. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna use this villain, and then it ends up being better because that villain suits his story way better than the initial villain he was going to use. So I feel like that could work as well. So
Yeah.
I feel like there will be a degree of separation. I hope there isn't, because audiences are not that stupid. But sometimes WB's like, you know what? We want to remain separate. So let's try to just have this universe and this universe doing its own thing. So people will be like, okay, this is clearly not the same Edward Nigma or Edward Nashton, and then Clayface or Court of Owls or Hush or whoever. So, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also this the visuals. I think is going to be a big thing. Like the Gotham City of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy looked very different than the Gotham City we got in the Batman. Which kind of felt like, whereas Christopher Nolan clearly shot in parts of New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh. Like you can tell there were recognizable parts of all of those cities. The city that we got in the Batman felt like some mix of like this Gothic architecture from like parts of Scotland, Liverpool, mixed in with like the profile of a New York City. Like
yeah,
not a New York City maybe from today, maybe like a New York City from the 70s and the 80s, like
yeah,
this dirty, grimy city that's full of crime and everything. And it just it's a very unique look. Like the kind of look, and it's for a character that's had so many iterations over the years, like somehow to be able to kind of come up with something uniquely different, that's fantastic. What I do wonder is that because he's doing that over on his side with the Batman, how's that gonna conflict or affect his work on the Arkham show in terms of the look, especially because if Andy Muschietti is directing the movie, James Gunn is sort of in charge of this universe. You've got like, and then of course Matt Reeves is producing the show. You've got these three people sort of trying to figure out how to make this Gotham City look distinctly Gotham, but also not the same Gotham as the Batman Gotham.
yeah,
Like it's or like look very similar to like the Gotham from which we didn't really get a ton of, but like of course the identifying characteristic of the DCEU Gotham was Gotham City and Metropolis were across from each other, and like and there was a bay in the middle, like Oakland and San Francisco. So but it was like a much more modern city, but had like these more rundown areas, which seems to be a theme with Gotham City iterations. But I'm wondering like which direction do you think they're gonna go with the version of the Gotham City, and then also like who do you think makes that decision? Like if Matt Reeves is like, no, I kind of want to do this for mine, and then Andy Muschietti's, but like I want to do this here, and then like is James Gunn kind of the mediator? Like he says, all right, we're gonna do this. Like how does that work?
I
Um,
have no idea. It's just like it just seems so complicated now, and since we don't have a lot of information, it's just kind of just speculation. But it's speculation that it's like cool to think about because again, with Arkham Asylum, it's just like a really cool concept for like a setting, especially when like one of the most famous Batman stories, A Serious House on Serious Earth, is like one of the best like one of the best stories from Batman stories of all time, which was the premise, the story behind what would become Batman Arkham Asylum. And so it's just like there's so much potential there, and I feel like no matter what they do with it, it'll be interesting. I feel like as long as it's just not like honestly, I can't think of like a bad way to do Arkham Asylum, like unless like they just redo a story. I guess if they just adapt a Serious House on Serious Earth, like it would it would just be kind of blah, because it's just like, okay, we've seen that before so many times, but in better circumstances. So but honestly, even then that would still be cool. So it's I feel like just anything they do, it'll just be cool, and I feel like the showrunner's talented enough that he'll make it work really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's gonna be interesting to see what comes of the show. I mean, there's so many questions to answer. We tried to answer a few of them here. It's obviously there's only so much we can talk about given how limited the information is that we have. But yeah, guys, let us know in the comments what you think. Like, do you think this Arkham show is going to lean into a slightly more higher concept version of Gotham, where you have super heroes and villains like meta humans running around, similar to the DCEU, or are we going to get something a little bit more grounded? Because you could do grounded in a world where meta humans exist. Like I think
Right.
that's definitely possible. But like, what do you guys think? And let us know in the comments. Of course, there's so many directions you can go with this. I think it's very interesting to kind of think about the idea of here's Matt Reeves developing this show. There's Andy Muschietti developing a movie that's going to probably tie into this show somehow, and then you have James Gunn sort of in the middle, who's mediating all of this stuff at DC Studios. So I would wonder like what that collaboration looks like. Obviously, and then of course Antonio Campos is the showrunner of the Arkham show. But obviously they've been working on this for some time, so there must be some level of appreciation for each other's creative visions, and then things must be lining up. But we've all seen people leave over creative differences late into the game, like, and things then have to be redeveloped, like that happens. So I'd be curious to find out like what your thoughts are in the comments, guys. Let us know. We can touch upon this topic again. Certainly if there's any more news about this, we will then revisit it for sure. And then yeah, keep checking back here for more news and updates on the DCU and anything related to the DC projects, whether it's the Batman, whether it's the Penguin. Of course, Creature Commandos is coming out soon, and then of course Superman Legacy going into production soon. I'm sure we're going to start getting behind the scenes photos. We'll do our best to dive into them and give you our insight into what could that mean for the movie. And of course, any surprises that come up, any breaking news, we are always here to cover that as well. So with all of that and so much more, keep checking back here on DCU Daily. Like and subscribe. That helps us out, puts us in the algorithm, gets us in circulation, and then hopefully more people are checking this out, and then that allows us to do this more often. So in the meantime, until tomorrow, it's been great talking to you. Go out there, watch something DC related, and then come back here and talk to us about it. Thanks, John. We'll see you next time.